Today we're going to take a look at uh, reading on decimals. Okay. The first concept is what is a decimal? It's simply an abbreviated way of writing a fraction. The first concept is writing decimals as fractions here. You see we have here a chart that tells us parts of a fraction as a whole part. Then you have your decimal point and you have your fractional part. Writing decimals as fractions. The digits to the right of the decimal point are the numerator. The place value of the rightmost digit determines the denominator. So in this case here, it goes out to the 10,000. So this will be some number in 700. This would be 732 10,000ths. Okay. Now writing down each decimal as words, we have here 15.38. So you read it from the furthest decimal point to the right. This is an 8. So you have 15 and for the decimal point, 38 hundredths. You have another decimal point. You read it from the furthest place to the right. It's a 3. That's in the 10. That's in the 4 places out. So that's 10,000ths place. So you read it back 103 10,000ths. That's how you would read it. Now the next concept here is writing a fraction in lowest terms. The numerator is 45. Notice the furthest place out on the decimal is the furthest place out to the right. And that's in the hundreds place, so the denominator is going to be over 100. So we have 45 over 100. In some cases, these simplify. In this case, they simplify here to 45 over 100 simplifies to 9 over 20. Okay. Now, when they don't simplify, chances are they have no common factors between them. Rounding decimals here. Find the place which you're rounding. Draw a cutoff line to the right of that place. The rest of the digits will be dropped. So now we're looking at rounding to the nearest, this right here, round to the nearest thousandths. If it's 4 or less, the part you're keeping stays the same. If it's 5 or more, the part you rounds up. So here we have one. Round to the nearest thousandths. So we have our thousandths place here. So we're going to look at what goes on in the next place out in the 10,000ths place. So I draw a line to separate it. And if it's 5 or greater, then I round up. So in this case here, it rounds up. It's not 9 rounds up to 10, so two digits are going to change in this case. Because 0.10, that's the nearest thousandths. Okay. Now here, when you're adding and subtracting decimals, what you end up doing is you line up your decimal places first. You make sure that all the place values are in the right columns, and you put placeholders here. You put placeholders here to make sure that all the columns are represented. And then you go ahead and add it up just like they were whole numbers. Okay. Now when you're multiplying decimals, in this case here, it's easier to do it like this here, in a partial product style. I'll say in a vertical style, yeah. So first thing they do here is to count the number of places past the decimal before they do any computation. It's so important to set up the problem first before you do your computation. So the first number has 0.169 has 3 places past the decimal. 0.21 has 2 places past the decimal. And then they multiply it as if they were whole numbers. So after they've done that, multiplying like it was whole numbers, the decimal will be right there. But then you shift the decimal point over, the number of places in the product. You have to shift it 5 places over. And that's how that happens there. Now you're dividing. You're dividing by a decimal. So when you're dividing by a decimal, as it turns out, it's easier to divide by a whole number. Okay. So what you end up doing is shifting the decimal point to shift it so that the divisor becomes a whole number. But on the inside, you shift the dividend So the same number of places. Then you put the decimal point right above where the final place for it. Okay. So here we're dividing 52.8 by 0.75. So they shift the place over two places. Now they're dividing by 75. But on the inside, they have to shift it over the same number of places. Then they put the decimal right above it. And then they go through the process of dividing like it was a whole number. This next concept here is writing fractions as a decimal. Divide the numerator by the denominator if necessary round. And this one here we have 1/8 as a decimal. 1/8 means 1 divided by 8. You can write it as 8 going into 1, and you divide it out like it was a whole number. So you don't have to shift anything because you're dividing by a whole number. And 1/8 is the same thing as 0.125. Notice it got the decimal points lining up first. Okay. Now here they're comparing. Now the easier way to do it here is just to compare, is to put everything in decimal form, and to compare each place, compare all the tenths, and compare all the hundreds, and compare all the thousands, until you can determine which one is smaller or larger than the other. So you can see here, they converted everything to a decimal. Then they can compare the tenths, then they compare which was the hundreds, and then they compare the thousands. And based on that, you can see which one is the largest and which one is the smallest.